Navy SEAL and his dog found wreckage in the snow. What was inside changed his life. Forever. The wind came down from the peaks like a living thing, sharp and unrelenting. It carried shards of ice that stung the skin and howled through the skeletal pines that clung to the mountainside. Ethan Cross adjusted the hood of his parka, breath ghosting into the air like smoke. The world around him was nothing but white and wind. To anyone else, it was the edge of the world. To him, it was familiar ground. Ranger moved ahead, a black and tan blur against the snow. The German shepherd's paws pressed perfect, precise tracks into the powder. His breath steamed, his nose low, scanning the air for scents that didn't belong. He was focused, calm, unstoppable. Everything Ethan had trained him to be. When the radio static hissed through the headset, Ranger's ears twitched before Ethan even reacted. "Cross, you're closing in on the coordinates," came the voice of the dispatcher from the Anchorage Rescue Unit. "Last ping showed signal strength increasing." "Copy that," Ethan said, voice low and steady. "Moving in with visual only. Blizzard's killing the drone feed." He glanced at the small handheld tracker strapped to his wrist. A pulsing green light blinked through the frost, old school and faint. It wasn't a beacon from any modern aircraft. It was analog, military, something from another era. He slowed, eyes narrowing behind his goggles. "This thing's ancient. Who the hell's still broadcasting on this frequency?" Ranger gave a soft whine, the kind that said he smelled something strange. The dog stopped at a ridge, body tense, tail still. Ethan knelt beside him, hand resting lightly on the shepherd's back. The contact was grounding. Years of combat, of watching good men disappear into chaos, had taught him that his dog was the only partner who never broke faith. Below them, through a break in the clouds, Ethan spotted it. A long scar in the snow, half buried under decades of ice. A fuselage twisted like a rusted ribcage. The storm had peeled away part of the mountain's face, revealing what time had tried to keep hidden. "Jesus," he whispered. "We've got ourselves a wreck." He slid down the slope, snow crunching beneath his boots. Ranger followed close, moving in a silent rhythm beside him. When they reached the site, Ethan brushed the frost from the metal, reading faded stenciling on the side. USF, 1987. It wasn't just old, it was impossible. That model had been retired before he'd even joined the Navy. He circled the wreckage, careful not to disturb anything. The smell hit first. Oil, metal, something faintly chemical, and beneath it, something else. Smoke. Fresh. Ethan froze. "That's not 20-year-old air." Ranger's hackles rose. He lowered his head, growling low in his chest. Then he moved to the tail section, sniffing the ground where the snow had been disturbed. Tracks. Boot prints, crisp and recent, led away from the wreck towards the tree line. Ethan's pulse quickened. "We're not alone." He unshouldered his pack, pulling out a compact flashlight and an old SIG rifle slung for emergencies. This was supposed to be a recovery run, not a combat op, but instinct had its own gravity. He and Ranger crept closer to the torn fuselage, light slicing through the snow haze. The metal skin of the plane gleamed like ice. Inside, the air was still. A few skeletonized seats, shards of glass, a rusted oxygen mask hanging from a frayed tube. Ethan crouched, sweeping his light across the interior until it caught something, an open panel near the cockpit. Inside it lay a black box, half frozen in a web of frost. The transmitter light still blinked weakly. "That's you, old friend," he murmured, "still calling home after all these years." Ranger let out a sharp bark that echoed through the wreck. It wasn't a warning, it was discovery. Ethan turned the beam toward the rear cargo hold. The dog's paws scraped at the snow-packed floor, revealing a piece of metal, A sealed container, military issue, with fresh fingerprints along the latch. Ethan's gut tightened. Someone had been here recently, and whatever they were after, they hadn't finished. He knelt, brushing away frost to read the faded lettering. Project Haven. The word meant nothing, but it felt heavy, like a memory trying to surface. He ran his gloved fingers along the side and felt warmth, residual heat. This box had been opened within hours. The wind outside shifted. Ranger's ears shot up again. Ethan clicked off his light. The faint hum of the storm gave way to something else. The distant mechanical growl of an engine, low and deliberate, moving somewhere beyond the ridge. He slipped toward the exit, flattening against the cold metal, Ranger beside him. Through the swirling snow, two dim headlights flickered between the trees far below, disappearing as quickly as they'd come. Whoever was out there knew this place, and they didn't want to be found. "Rescue 1," Ethan said into his radio, keeping his voice a whisper. "I've located the wreckage. It's military, pre-90s. No survivors, but there's evidence of recent activity. Possible intruders on site." Static. Then silence. The storm swallowed the signal whole. He exhaled slowly, lowering the radio. Figures. Ranger pressed against his leg, eyes locked on the dark line of the forest. The dog's breath came fast and sharp, the way it always did when danger was close. Ethan rested a hand on his neck. "Easy, boy. We'll check the cargo, log the coordinates, then we're out." But as he turned back toward the box, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, etched faintly into the metal near the lock, half hidden under frost. Letters scratched by hand, shaky but deliberate. "Help us." He froze. The air felt suddenly thinner. He looked toward the tree line again, feeling that old electric tension crawl up his spine. Ranger growled once. Deep, primal, the kind of sound that meant they were being watched. Ethan raised his eyes to the ridge above them. For a second, he thought it was just the wind carving shapes in the snow. Then he saw it. A silhouette, human, motionless against the white, holding something long and glinting. A rifle. The storm howled again, swallowing the figure, leaving only the ghost of movement. Ethan lifted his weapon slowly, heart pounding. "We're not supposed to be here, Ranger," he muttered, voice tight. "But looks like neither are they." Ranger's gaze never left the ridge. His muscles coiled, ready. The wind carried the faint echo of metal sliding against metal, the unmistakable sound of a bolt chambering around. Ethan whispered, almost to himself. The mountain wasn't silent, it was watching. Then came the flash, brief, distant, but unmistakable. A single muzzle flare against the white. The shot cracked through the blizzard like thunder. The bullet tore into the wreckage inches from Ethan's head, showering him with shards of ice and steel. Ranger lunged forward, barking, dragging Ethan down behind a wing strut. Snow exploded around them as another shot ripped through the air. Whoever was out there wasn't scavenging, they were protecting something. Ethan pressed his back against the frozen metal, heart hammering, the cold biting through his gear. "All right, boy," he said, steadying his breath. "Looks like we just found something worth killing for." Ranger growled again, low and fierce, eyes burning in the storm's dim light. The sound rolled through the wreck like thunder, and somewhere above them, the shadow moved closer. The morning came grey and silent, the storm finally spent. A thin light broke across the ridge, painting the frozen wreckage in shades of ash and silver. Ethan Cross stood at the edge of the torn fuselage, frost clinging to his beard, his breath curling into the cold. Ranger moved beside him, quiet but alert, his fur rimmed with ice. Together they looked like survivors from another age, two shadows left behind by the mountain. The world was still, too still. Ethan's gut told him that silence wasn't peace. It was cover. He crouched at the opening Ranger had found earlier and wedged his gloved fingers into the gap. Metal screeched as the frozen hatch gave way. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, filled with the bitter tang of hydraulic fluid and decay. For a moment, even Ranger hesitated. Then, with a low exhale, Ethan slipped through, the dog right behind him. The interior of the aircraft was a tomb. Frost glimmered along every surface, sealing time inside like glass. A row of skeletal flight seats stretched down the narrow fuselage, each one holding what remained of a man. 4 of them, frozen in place, their uniforms stiff, the insignias faded but still readable under the ice. Ethan moved slowly, reverently. He'd seen death before, too much of it. But there was something different about this. These weren't casualties of war, they were forgotten. He brushed the frost from a shoulder patch and frowned. The emblem wasn't familiar. It wasn't a standard Air Force unit. He checked the tags on each body. 3 metal ID cards, 1 missing. 4 men, 3 names. He muttered, "That's not an accident." Ranger sniffed along the cabin floor, nose twitching as he picked up a scent older than dust. He stopped suddenly, pawing at the floor beneath the pilot's seat. His claws scraped against metal. Ethan followed his lead, using his knife to pry up a panel. Beneath it lay a sealed compartment. Inside, wrapped in cracked insulation, was a small military-grade metal case. It was heavy, about the size of a briefcase, its surface worn but clearly marked with bold black letters. Project Haven. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. He'd seen classified stenciling before, but this was different. The paint was newer. Someone had been here. "Good work, buddy," he said softly. Ranger's ears flicked back at the tone, waiting for what came next. Ethan brushed away a layer of frost and noticed the edges of the latch were scuffed. Recently, whoever had handled it had done so with bare hands. He tried opening it, but the lock was magnetic sealed and dead cold. No way in without tools. He pulled out his radio. "Rescue Command, this is Cross. I've found the source of the beacon. Confirmed USAF aircraft. Call sign unknown. 4 occupants, 3 IDs recovered. Sending photos now." The line cracked and hissed. Then came the faint, static-laced voice of his superior. "Copy that, Cross. Pack up and return to base. Repeat. Do not engage or remove anything from the wreckage. This site's being reclassified under federal jurisdiction. Do you copy?" Ethan froze. "Reclassified? I thought this was a rescue recovery." No answer. The radio hissed again, then fell silent. He lowered it slowly. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's what I thought." Ranger let out a soft growl, the kind that meant unease. Ethan knelt beside the dog, his hand finding the fur along his neck. "They don't want us here, boy, which means there's something worth finding." He secured the case into his pack and started toward the exit. The light outside had dimmed again, the sun swallowed by drifting clouds. The wind carried a low, rhythmic creak from somewhere above the ridge, metal shifting under snow. He stopped, listening. Then came another sound, faint but distinct, the crunch of boots. He moved to the edge of the wreck, peering out across the slope. Nothing. Just white. But Ranger was already facing the opposite direction, body low, ears flat, teeth bared. Ethan turned. Through the thin fog rising from the snow, a shape flickered, gone as fast as it appeared. A human outline moving between the trees. He raised his rifle, scanning the horizon. No movement, only the whisper of the storm returning. When he looked back at Ranger, the dog was trembling, but not from cold. The shepherd's instincts had never failed him. "Easy," Ethan murmured, crouching low. "We don't know who it is yet." Ranger ignored the command, nose pressed to the air, every muscle coiled. He barked once, a sharp, cutting sound that echoed through the ravine. It wasn't fear. It was a warning. Ethan scanned the tree line again, heart hammering. There, just for a heartbeat, a glint of glass. The sun caught something metallic between the pines, like a lens. Someone was watching. He stepped back into the wreckage, pulling Ranger with him, and crouched behind the torn fuselage wall. He waited, eyes locked on the ridge. The silence stretched. Then a sound, a low, deliberate click. A rifle bolt. Ethan ducked instinctively. The first shot tore through the side of the aircraft, sending shards of frozen aluminum flying. Ranger barked again, loud and defiant, the sound rolling through the mountains. Another shot hit higher, close enough to rip through Ethan's shoulder strap. Whoever was out there wasn't just warning him off, they wanted to erase every trace. He grabbed his pack, heart pounding, and crawled toward the tail section. Ranger stayed pressed to his side, tail down, eyes locked on the opening. "Not today," Ethan whispered. "Move." They broke from the wreck and dove into the snowdrifts, sliding down a slope as a third bullet cracked past, hitting metal behind them. Snow exploded around their boots. They didn't stop until they reached the cover of the trees. Ethan pressed his back to a trunk, gasping for air. Ranger crouched beside him, panting steam, eyes scanning the ridge above. The shots had stopped. The forest had swallowed the echoes whole. He waited. The only sound was the wind and his heartbeat. Finally, he looked down at the dog. "We got their attention." Ranger's eyes met his, steady and unafraid. In those amber depths, Ethan saw something he hadn't felt in years. Resolve. The kind that comes when a man knows he's in over his head but refuses to turn back. He pulled the metal case from his pack and stared at the stenciled words again. Project Haven. The paint was too fresh, the design too modern. Someone had made sure it stayed here for a reason. He thought about the order to retreat, about the missing ID tag, about the way the signal had suddenly appeared after decades of silence. None of it fit. A flake of snow landed on the lid, melting instantly against the faint warmth of the metal. It wasn't supposed to be warm. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Whatever this is, it's not done yet." Ranger's tail twitched. His gaze shifted back toward the wreck, where the wind had already begun to erase their footprints. The mountain was closing in again, burying what it didn't want found. As they moved away, Ethan cast one last look over his shoulder. High above, on the ridge, he saw movement. Again, two figures now, silhouettes barely visible through the snow. Watching. He tightened his grip on his rifle. "They think the mountain's their secret," he said softly. "Let's find out whose secret it really is." Ranger trotted ahead, breaking a path through the drifts, his paw prints dark and deliberate against the endless white. The man followed, the wreck vanishing behind them into the cold. Neither looked back. The mountain did. By the time the storm rolled back in, the light had vanished completely. The mountain turned into a world of sound and white, a shifting void where direction meant nothing. Snow hammered against Ethan's goggles, blinding him in waves. He could barely see Ranger, a dark blur 10 feet ahead, his silhouette breaking and reforming in the blizzard. They'd made camp in a narrow ravine, a half-sheltered cut in the rock. Ethan had spent the last hour fortifying the tent, keeping the metal case from the wreck sealed tight inside his pack. Every instinct told him to keep moving, but the visibility was gone. They were trapped for the night. Ranger's bark cut through the wind, sharp, urgent, different from anything Ethan had heard since the firefight. He froze, hand moving automatically to his sidearm. "Ranger, hold position!" No response. Just another bark, closer now, followed by a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A voice. Weak, broken, barely human. Ethan snatched his flashlight and pushed through the curtain of snow, his boots sinking deep into the drifts. The beam cut across white emptiness, then landed on something moving. A figure collapsed against a drift, half buried in the snow. Ranger was circling her, whining low, nudging her shoulder with his nose. "Hey, easy boy, easy," Ethan said, kneeling. The woman's face was pale, lips blue, lashes frozen together. She was breathing, barely. Her jacket had an Air Force insignia, half torn. Blood had seeped through the shoulder seam, frozen solid. He brushed snow from her face. She looked to be mid-30s, maybe younger, but her eyes, when they fluttered open, carried the kind of exhaustion that only comes from running too long. "Help. Me," she whispered. "I've got you." Ethan lifted her carefully, her body limp but trembling. Ranger stayed pressed close, tail low, eyes scanning the white for danger. They made it back to the tent just as the wind howled hard enough to bend the poles. Inside, Ethan lit the small gas heater and wrapped her in thermal blankets. It took nearly 20 minutes before her breathing steadied. Ranger lay near her feet, ears twitching with every gust of wind outside. When she finally spoke again, her voice was rasped and broken. "You're not rescue, are you?" "Civilian contract. Anchorage rescue team," Ethan replied. "Name's Cross. Found you about half a mile north of the crash site. You want to tell me what the hell you were doing out there?" She met his eyes. "Looking for the same thing you found?" Ethan frowned. "The wreck." She nodded slowly. "I used to work for the Air Force, on the program that plane was carrying." Ranger's head lifted at the tension in Ethan's voice. "You're saying you knew what was in it?" She hesitated. "I knew enough. My name's Dr. Nora Hale. I was part of the Haven Project, until I walked away." The name hit him like ice. Haven, the same word etched on the box. "You're going to need to explain that," Ethan said quietly. She looked toward Ranger before answering, her gaze softening for a second. "It started as something good. We were supposed to help soldiers like you, combat veterans with trauma, neurological injuries, a way to repair the brain through genetic therapy. But the research was taken somewhere else. They used canine DNA, military canines. The goal shifted from healing to enhancement." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're talking about weaponizing them." Nora nodded. "And when the results failed to meet control protocols, they shut the program down. Officially. But one test shipment went missing. A prototype strain. That plane." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly beneath the roar of the wind. Ranger shifted, restless, as if he sensed the weight of what was being said. Ethan stared at the heater flame, the orange glow flickering across his face. "So you came all the way out here in a snowstorm?" he said, "to find the remains of a program you abandoned." "I didn't abandon it," she whispered. "I tried to destroy it, but someone else didn't let it die. They sent men to recover the data core before you did." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the metal case sitting by his pack. Nora followed his gaze. "You found it, didn't you?" He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. Her expression hardened. "Then you need to understand what you're holding. That case doesn't just contain data, it contains a bioseed, a dormant sample. It was supposed to die in the crash." Ethan looked at her, reading the truth in her voice. "Why tell me this now?" "Because if those men find it, they'll reactivate it. And if that happens, this mountain won't be the only graveyard." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside built to a low, constant growl. The tent shuddered under the weight of snow. Then Ranger moved suddenly, standing stiff, nose to the wind. A deep growl vibrated from his chest. Ethan followed his line of sight to the tent flap. The storm hadn't stopped. It had changed tone. Beneath the howl of the wind was another sound, mechanical and steady. Ethan killed the light. "Engines," he whispered. Nora looked terrified. "They found us." Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the entrance. Through the storm's haze, faint beams of light cut across the snow. Headlights. A snowcat, military grade, crawling its way toward the ridge. He glanced back at Nora. "You said they wanted the data. Who are they?" She swallowed hard. "The ones who restarted Haven. They were waiting for that signal to go live. You led them straight here." Ranger barked once, loud and sharp. The sound of boots echoed faintly through the storm. Ethan's mind snapped into motion. The ridge above gave them cover, but not for long. He scanned the terrain, calculating angles, distances, escape routes. He turned to Nora. "You can walk?" She nodded weakly. "For now. Then we move. Ranger, with me." They pushed out into the blizzard again, snow slashing across their faces. The headlights had vanished, but shadows moved within the storm. 3, maybe 4 figures advancing with practiced rhythm. Ethan led them along the ravine's curve, moving low, every step calculated. Ranger stayed close to Nora's side, his body between her and the cold. A flash of movement ahead, too close. Ethan shoved Nora down just as a suppressed shot tore through the snow where she'd been standing. Ranger lunged forward, a streak of muscle and fury, his snarl cutting through the white noise. The attacker didn't even have time to turn before the shepherd hit him, teeth sinking into his arm. The rifle clattered into the snow. Ethan closed the gap, disarmed the man, and shoved him face first into the drift. Another shadow appeared to their left. 2 quick shots. Ethan's rifle coughed once, the muzzle flash brief. Silence followed. Nora looked at him, wide-eyed. "You're not just rescue, are you?" "Not exactly," he said, grabbing the fallen rifle and tossing it aside. "Come on." They climbed higher along the ridge until the engine sounds faded. Ranger led the way, checking every few feet, his breath steaming, body trembling from exertion but unyielding. When they finally reached the shelter of an overhang, Ethan set Nora down, both of them panting clouds into the freezing air. Below, through a gap in the storm, he could see the snowcat's lights circling the wreck like vultures. Whoever they weren't leaving. He turned to Nora. "You said the prototype's still alive." She shook her head. "Not alive, but not dead either. Think of it like a hibernating virus. Haven used hybrid cells, half canine, half human. They were meant to merge instinct with cognition. It worked, once." Ranger lifted his head, eyes locked on her. She looked back at him for a long, silent second. "You trained him yourself?" she asked. "Not from birth." Ethan said, "I adopted him after a canine unit was decommissioned." "Why?" Her gaze deepened. "Because dogs like him, shepherds with neural conditioning, were the control subjects for Haven. If the DNA came from any live test sample, it might have come from his line." Ethan looked at Ranger, whose breath hung in the air like smoke. The dog's eyes met his, steady, knowing, almost human. For a moment, Ethan forgot the cold. The silence between man and dog was something sacred, older than any war or experiment. Finally, he said quietly, "Then maybe the truth doesn't belong in a lab. Maybe it's standing right in front of me." The wind howled again, shaking snow from the ledge above. Ranger turned toward the sound, muscles taut, ears up. The storm was far from over, and now neither was their fight. Night fell hard across the mountain. The storm had thinned into a slow, whispering wind, the kind that carried sound for miles. Ethan Cross and Nora Hale sat in silence inside a narrow cave that barely kept out the cold. Ranger lay near the entrance, alert even in exhaustion, his ears twitching with every distant crack of ice. Ethan had built a small fire from the scraps of their emergency kit. Its light flickered against the rock walls, turning their faces into fleeting ghosts. Nora's wound had stopped bleeding, but her eyes were hollow, her hands shaking slightly as she stared at the metal case between them. "He'll come for it," she said finally. Ethan didn't look up. "Who?" She hesitated. "Viktor Sokolov, former Spetsnaz colonel. He was assigned to Arctic Dawn, the same joint operation your unit ran 10 years ago. He was there when the program ended." Ethan's head lifted slowly. The name hit like a shard of ice. "Sokolov's dead." Nora's eyes flickered towards the cave mouth. "Not anymore." Before Ethan could respond, Ranger's growl filled the space, a deep, vibrating sound that made the air itself tense. The shepherd rose, hackles raised, body rigid. Ethan killed the fire with one swift motion, plunging the cave into darkness. Then came the sound. Boots crunching snow, faint but deliberate. More than one set. Ethan reached for his rifle and motioned to Nora to stay low. Ranger moved ahead silently, his form blending with the dark as he crept toward the opening. A second later, a beam of white light swept across the snow outside, followed by voices speaking in Russian. Ethan's stomach sank. She was right. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The first shadow appeared at the mouth of the cave. Ranger lunged before the man could react. The flashlight spun into the snow as the dog slammed into him, teeth flashing. A gunshot cracked through the air, deafening in the close space. Ranger yelped, short, sharp, and Ethan moved before he thought. 2 shots, clean and fast. The intruder dropped without a sound. Ethan turned, heart hammering. Ranger staggered back, blood staining the snow near his shoulder, but he stood tall, defiant. Ethan knelt, checking the wound, grazed, not deep. "You're fine, buddy," he murmured. "You're fine." A slow clap echoed from the darkness outside. Then a voice, thick with an old accent and something colder. "Still fast, Cross. I was wondering if the years had softened you." Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. "Viktor." A tall man stepped into the light of the dying fire. His beard was streaked with grey, his eyes hard and bright as glass. His coat carried no insignia now, but the way he moved, silent, predatory, spoke of decades in the field. "I told you once," Viktor said calmly. "Some truths are better left buried." "You tried to bury a lot of things," Ethan said. "Didn't work." Viktor smiled without warmth. "You shouldn't have come back here." Behind him, 3 soldiers fanned out, rifles raised. Ethan's hand moved toward his trigger, but Viktor lifted a gloved hand. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be frozen already. I just want what belongs to me." His eyes flicked to the case near Nora's feet. Project Haven was never meant to be found. Nora stood, trembling but defiant. "You mean it was never meant to be exposed?" Viktor looked at her with something between pity and amusement. "Dr. Hale, you of all people should know what Haven cost us. Do you think the world's ready for what you created?" "I didn't create it," she shot back. "I tried to end it." Viktor's voice dropped. "You don't end evolution. You redirect it." Ethan stepped between them. "You're not taking the case." Viktor's smile faded. "You're still the same. Honor before sense. You think this is about control? That program changed what it means to be human. You think your dog's loyalty is natural? He's living proof of what we made possible." Ethan's eyes darkened. "You're wrong. He's loyal because I earn it every day. That's not science. That's trust." For the first time, Viktor's composure cracked. "You sound like the old commander before he put a bullet in his own head." He gestured to his men. "Take it." The soldiers advanced. Ethan fired first, one clean burst that dropped the lead man. Chaos erupted, gunfire echoing off the stone, snow exploding as rounds hit rock. Nora ducked behind a boulder, clutching the case to her chest. Ranger, despite the blood on his shoulder, charged into the nearest attacker, knocking him down. Ethan moved fast, instincts taking over. 2 more shots. Silence. The last man fell face first into the snow. Victor didn't flinch. He simply watched. Ethan's rifle clicked empty. Victor stepped forward slowly, boots crunching through the bloodied snow. You think you've won? This isn't over, Cross. The mountain doesn't forget. Ethan raised his empty weapon anyway. Neither do I. Victor's gaze dropped to Ranger, who stood beside his master, chest heaving, eyes fixed and unyielding. He's a fine animal. Victor said softly. Shame you don't know what's inside him. Before Ethan could react, Victor threw a small device into the snow, a black cylinder blinking red. Ethan lunged back, grabbing Nora and pulling her behind cover. The device detonated in a flash of light and pressure, sending shock waves through the cave mouth. When the ringing in Ethan's ears cleared, Victor was gone. Snow drifted through the entrance again, carried by a rising wind. Ranger limped toward the edge, nose to the air, but there was no scent left to follow, only smoke and cold. Ethan knelt beside him, pressing his forehead against the dog's. You did good, boy. Real good. Ranger's tail gave one faint thump against the ground, his eyes half-lidded from pain, but steady. Nora watched them, tears freezing on her cheeks. He's not just a dog, she whispered. He's what Haven was supposed to be before it became a weapon. Ethan looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Then maybe he's proof it can be undone. Outside, the wind rose again, swirling snow through the shattered entrance. Somewhere in the distance, a faint echo of laughter. Victor's, carried through the dark, then faded into the storm. Ethan stared out into the night. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a reckoning. Someone had to make sure the ghosts of the program stayed buried. For good. Ranger leaned against his leg, silent, resolute. The man rested a hand on the shepherd's fur and whispered, We finish this together. The dog lifted his head, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the darkness moved like breath. In the wind, the mountain seemed to whisper back, not with words, but with warning. The past was awake again. The mountain had gone quiet again, as if holding its breath. Ethan and Nora moved through the snow like ghosts, Ranger trotting ahead with his nose to the wind. The storm had cleared, leaving behind a sky cut open by moonlight. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of boots, the rasp of breath, the soft rhythm of Ranger's paws. They were racing against time. Victor and his men would return, and once they did, the wreck would be sealed forever. When they reached the crash site, the fuselage gleamed under the pale light, half buried in snow and ice. The bullet holes from last night had already begun to frost over, as if the mountain was trying to erase the violence. Ethan crouched beside Ranger and whispered, Find it again, boy. Ranger sniffed the air, pacing in tight circles, his breath forming white clouds in the cold. He stopped near the tail section, ears twitching, and began digging furiously. The snow came away in thick clumps, revealing a layer of compacted ice. Beneath it, something hollow echoed when Ethan struck it with his knife. There, he murmured. He cleared the snow until he uncovered a narrow metal hatch almost invisible under the frost. It wasn't standard aircraft construction, no serial numbers, no panel markings. Just a simple reinforced door with a small mechanical lock. Nora joined him, breath fogging. That's not part of the airframe. It's an addition. Then whatever's inside didn't come with the plane, Ethan said. He pried the hatch open. Cold vapor hissed out, curling into the air like smoke. Inside was a ladder descending into darkness. Ranger barked once, low and cautious. Ethan looked at Nora. You stay topside. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, I'm coming with you. She cut in. If this is what I think it is, you'll need me. Ranger didn't wait for permission. He leapt down first, landing softly in the dark. Ethan followed, boots clanging against the frozen rungs. The air inside was thick and metallic, tinged with oil and something antiseptic. At the bottom, their flashlights swept across a narrow chamber carved directly into the ice. It wasn't natural. The walls were lined with frost-covered steel panels and cables that had long since gone dead. In the center of the room sat a single containment pod, coated in frost, its surface glowing faintly from an emergency battery still miraculously alive. Nora stared. "That's a cryovault!" Ethan approached carefully, brushing away the frost on the front glass. Inside was a cylinder about the size of a man's torso, filled with amber fluid. Something dark floated within, a tangled shape that looked disturbingly organic. "What the hell is that?" Nora's voice was soft, almost reverent. "The last active biosample from Project Haven. They called it a hybrid core, neural tissue grown from both human and canine DNA. Ethan's stomach turned. "You're telling me that thing's alive?" "Dormant," she said, "but viable. Haven's goal was to create enhanced soldiers, ones who could merge human decision-making with canine instinct. They wanted the perfect partnership. It was supposed to be you and them, not separate." He glanced at Ranger, who stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the pod. His breathing was shallow, focused, almost uneasy. Ethan said quietly, "You think he knows? Instinct always remembers." Nora replied. They moved toward the far wall, where a control console was encased in a thick layer of ice. Ethan brushed it clean, revealing an old touchpad and a hard drive dock. To his surprise, the system still had a faint hum of power. He pulled the small drive he'd found earlier from his pack and slid it into place. The monitor flickered to life. A black screen appeared, then white letters. "Project Haven, access granted." Lines of classified files began to scroll, the hum of the machine echoing through the chamber. Ethan leaned closer as the first page loaded, a project summary. He read in silence, each word carving deeper into him. Subject, Ranger. Unit designation, HNK97A. Genotype, modified. Neural interface success rate, 98%. Transfer candidate, Commander Ethan Cross. He froze. His own name, right there, buried in government code. Nora whispered, "You were part of it." Ethan shook his head. "No, I was never briefed. I was just part of the rescue unit." She pointed to the screen. "Not rescue, field validation. They paired soldiers with enhanced canines to test cooperative response. They didn't tell you because you were the variable. They wanted to see if loyalty could be built, not engineered." He stared at Ranger. The dog stood in the cold, light, tail low, eyes locked on his. For the first time, Ethan felt something shift, a realization that this partnership wasn't coincidence. It was design. He swallowed hard. "They built him for me." "No," Nora said quietly. "They built him because of you. Your old unit used your psychological profile to model behavioral triggers for the dogs. You didn't just train Ranger, you made him possible." The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "He's not a weapon. He's not some lab experiment." Nora met his gaze. "No, he's proof that the experiment worked, but you changed the outcome. Haven wanted obedience. You gave him choice." Before Ethan could respond, Ranger growled, a deep, warning sound that made the ice seem to vibrate. The dog turned toward the ladder, teeth bared. Ethan snapped his light to the hatch above. A faint glow flickered through the opening. Flashlights, multiple, moving fast. "They're here," he said. Nora grabbed the hard drive and ripped it free from the console. "We can't let them have it." Ethan looked back at the pod. The power lights had begun to flicker as if reacting to the disturbance. The liquid inside rippled slightly, bubbles rising to the surface. Something inside the fluid twitched. "Time to go," he said. They climbed fast. Ranger first, moving like lightning despite the wound on his shoulder. The moment Ethan's head cleared the hatch, a voice shouted through the storm. "Drop it!" A flashlight beam hit his face. Victor's men. 3 of them, rifles raised. Ethan dove sideways as gunfire erupted, bullets chewing through the ice around them. Ranger lunged forward, slamming into the nearest soldier's legs, sending him sprawling. Ethan rolled behind the fuselage, firing back into the storm. The muzzle flashes painted the snow in bursts of orange and white. "Go!" he shouted at Nora. She bolted toward the ridge, clutching the drive. One of the soldiers tried to cut her off, but Ranger was faster. He hit the man mid-step, driving him into the snow with a snarl. A shot went off, grazing Ranger's flank. The dog yelped but didn't stop. Ethan fired again, dropping the last man. When the noise finally stopped, only the wind remained. Ethan knelt beside Ranger, checking the wound, superficial again. The dog licked his glove, tail thumping weakly. "You never quit, do you?" Ethan whispered. Behind them, the hatch still gaped open, steam curling from its depths. The faint hum from below had changed, higher, unstable. Nora turned back, eyes wide. The power surge from the firefight, it's destabilizing the pod. Ethan looked toward the vault, the red light from inside pulsing like a heartbeat. "Then we bury it." He tossed a grenade into the opening, grabbed Ranger by the collar, and ran. The explosion tore through the fuselage, the shockwave throwing snow into the air like a tidal wave. When it settled, the hatch was gone, sealed under tons of ice and steel. Ethan stood breathing hard, staring at the place where it had been. Nora clutched the hard drive to her chest. Ranger sat beside him, chest heaving, eyes bright and steady. Ethan finally said, "Whatever Haven started, it ends with us." Nora looked at the dog and nodded. "Then maybe he's not their creation anymore. Maybe he's yours." Ranger pressed against Ethan's leg, watching the smoke fade into the sky. His breath came slow, steady. The cold wind lifted the snow around them again, wiping the world clean. But not the truth. Ethan realized that the dog beside him wasn't the result of a failed experiment. He was proof that loyalty could survive where science failed. And for the first time since the mountain began to whisper its secrets, Ethan wasn't afraid of what they might find next. They reached the old ranger station just before dawn. The place was little more than a shell of wood and rusted metal, long abandoned by the search and rescue teams that once used it. Ethan cleared the entrance, rifle raised, while Nora followed behind, clutching the hard drive tight against her chest. Ranger limped through the doorway last, blood crusted in his fur but eyes sharp as ever. Ethan got a small generator running. The hum filled the silence as the first traces of morning light slipped through the cracks in the boards. He connected the drive to a battered laptop from his pack. The machine buzzed to life, screen flickering with lines of encrypted data. "This is it," Ethan said quietly. "Proof that Haven existed. Proof they lied to every soldier who ever trusted them." Nora stood behind him, watching the code scroll. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from something deeper. He didn't see the moment she slipped her hand into her jacket pocket, pulling out a small transceiver. Its red light blinked once. She turned her back to him, whispering into the static. "He has it. The data's intact. You can still stop him." A voice crackled through the receiver, low, measured, unmistakably Russian. "Good, Dr. Hale. You've done the right thing. Keep him occupied. We're close." Her throat tightened. "You promised no one else would get hurt." "Control is never clean," Victor replied. "You of all people should know that." She shut off the transmitter, tucking it away before Ethan turned around. "Signal's weak," he said. "Once I get this uploaded, the military will have everything they need to bury Haven for good." Nora forced a nod. "You really think they'll tell the truth?" "I don't care if they do," Ethan said. as long as the right people see it. Ranger raised his head suddenly, ears pricked. He growled low, the sound echoing off the wooden walls. Ethan froze. "You hear that?" Before she could answer, glass shattered. A flash grenade rolled across the floor. The blast threw them both to the ground, ears ringing. Ranger barked through the light, launching himself towards the door as armed men poured in. Ethan fired twice, hitting one, ducked behind the desk, grabbed the hard drive, but a bullet ripped through the air, slamming into his shoulder. He stumbled, pain flooding his side. Ranger lunged again, teeth sinking into the leg of the nearest soldier before another shot struck him. The dog yelped and fell hard against the floorboards. "Ranger!" Ethan shouted, dragging himself toward him. But Victor stepped through the smoke, rifle steady, face unreadable. "You never learn," Victor said. "You can't fight what you don't understand." Ethan tried to raise his gun, but Victor kicked it away, then glanced at Nora. "You did well, Doctor. I'll take it from here." Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned to her. "You?" Nora couldn't meet his eyes. "I didn't have a choice." Victor crossed to the table, grabbing the drive. "You could have stayed in the dark, Cross, but you had to go digging." Ethan tried to stand, pain tearing through his shoulder. "You won't get far with that." Victor smirked. "Far enough." He motioned to his men, who dragged Ethan to his knees. Nora stood frozen, the weight of her betrayal crashing down with every heartbeat. Then Ranger moved. The dog, bleeding and broken, pulled himself across the floor. His breath came shallow, his paw dragging behind him, but his eyes never left his handler. He pressed his body against Ethan's leg, teeth bared at Victor, a low rumble rising from deep within his chest. Victor's gaze flickered, just for a moment, to the shepherd. "He's still fighting. Impressive." Something in Nora cracked. She stepped forward. "Stop. Don't hurt them." Victor ignored her. "Finish it," he ordered one of his soldiers. Nora lunged before the man could move, grabbing Victor's sidearm from his holster. 2 shots exploded through the cabin, one hitting the soldier, the other shattering the table where the hard drive sat. Victor spun, shocked but unshaken, as she grabbed the drive and bolted for the door. "Dr. Hale!" he roared. "You can't outrun this!" Ethan reached for Ranger, pressing a hand to the dog's side. "Stay with me, boy. Stay!" The shepherd's tail twitched once. His breath came in a slow, steady rhythm, painful, but alive. Outside, Nora stumbled through the snow, clutching the drive to her chest, the storm beginning to rise again around her. Behind her, Victor's men shouted, their voices drowned by wind and gunfire. Ethan struggled to his feet, gripping the wall for balance. Through the haze, he could still hear Ranger's faint growl, refusing to let go. He looked toward the open door, the storm swallowing everything beyond it. The only thing he knew for certain was that Nora had made her choice, and that the truth, once again, was running for its life. He knelt beside Ranger, voice low, steady. "You did good, partner. You always do." The dog's eyes met his, fierce even in pain, and for the first time since the wreck, Ethan felt something fragile but unbreakable take hold again. Not hope, but purpose. Outside, a single set of footprints disappeared into the white, carrying the last chance the world had to see what Project Haven really was. When Ethan came to, the world was blue and burning cold. His wrists were bound behind him with steel cable, and his head throbbed from a blow he didn't remember taking. The air was heavy with the scent of diesel, blood, and something ancient, ice that had never seen the sun. He was inside a glacier cave. Torches hissed along the walls, their flames flickering against the translucent ice that stretched upward like glass cathedrals. Shadows rippled through the blue, and among them, Viktor Sokolov stood with the calm patience of a man who already believed he had won. "You've always been a survivor," Viktor said, voice echoing softly off the frozen walls. But survival is meaningless without purpose. Ethan's throat was raw. And you think Haven gave you one? It gave me clarity. Victor replied, stepping closer. The torchlight caught the faint scar running down his cheek. You saw the files. You know what they built. You could finish it, correct what your government failed to perfect. Give me the decryption key and you can walk out of here. Ethan looked up, blood freezing on his lip. You're not looking for control. You're looking for immortality. Victor smiled faintly. Semantics. He crouched beside him. Haven was never about control, Cross. It was about evolution, the union of instinct and intelligence, man and hound. We were meant to be one species, one will. Ethan's jaw tightened. You turned it into a weapon. And your country turned it into a myth, Victor said. But you carried the proof in your shadow all these years. That animal, Ranger, the prototype that lived. Something in Ethan's chest twisted. You leave him out of this. Victor stood, pacing slowly. He's the key to unlocking the data, isn't he? The algorithm that links handler to hound. That bond, it's the last lock I need opened. Ethan didn't answer. The Russian leaned in, eyes cold as the ice around them. Then maybe I'll bring him here. Watch him choose who he's truly loyal to. Outside, miles away, Ranger was already moving through the storm. His breath came in ragged bursts, every step painting blood into the snow. His fur was matted, his gait uneven, but his nose was fixed on one scent, Ethan's. Nora stumbled behind him, clutching a flare for light, her body shaking from exhaustion. The blizzard screamed through the canyon, slicing visibility to nothing, but Ranger pressed forward, relentless. Slow down, she gasped. The dog didn't listen. He couldn't. Something deep and primal was pulling him, an unbroken thread between his heart and Ethan's, fading heartbeat echoing in his mind. Inside the cave, Victor's patience thinned. He pressed the muzzle of his pistol under Ethan's chin. Last chance. Tell me where the rest of the encryption key is. Ethan met his eyes. You already destroyed what you were chasing. Haven died the moment you started believing in it. Victor sighed. Pity. He turned his head toward the entrance and froze. A faint sound carried through the tunnels, a single bark, low and echoing, rolling through the ice like thunder. Ranger's silhouette appeared at the mouth of the cave, framed by swirling snow and torchlight. His eyes gleamed gold against the blue. Victor smirked. Well, speak of the devil. The dog didn't wait. He charged. The first gunshot cracked through the chamber, shattering a wall of ice. Ranger darted sideways, using the uneven terrain as cover, moving with a speed that defied his injuries. Ethan threw himself sideways as Victor fired again, the bullet grazing his temple. Nora appeared behind Ranger, breathless and wild-eyed, holding the hard drive tight. Victor's men rushed her, but she hurled the flare into their path. Flames leapt, searing bright. For a second, the cave was all orange light and chaos. Ethan ripped his bound wrists free against the jagged edge of a metal crate, ignoring the pain. He lunged at Victor, tackling him to the ice. The gun clattered away, skidding across the floor. Victor was older, but stronger than he looked. He slammed Ethan against a column of ice, trying to crush his windpipe. You can't stop this, he snarled. Ethan drove an elbow into his ribs, shoving him back. The two men circled, breath steaming, torches hissing. The ice beneath them cracked with each blow. Behind them, Nora tried to access the console on the wall, the one that controlled the power flow to the cryo core. She needed to destroy the data, end it for good. But Victor saw her move. He tore free of Ethan's grasp and lunged for her. Ranger intercepted him mid-step, colliding with his chest, teeth locking on his arm. Victor shouted in pain, swinging wildly. The blow caught the dog across the side of his head. Ranger stumbled but held his ground. Nora seized her moment. She ran to the center of the cave, holding the hard drive high. "You want it? Then take it!" And she threw it into the deep fissure of ice that split the floor. The drive spun once in the torchlight before vanishing into darkness. Victor roared and lunged after it, losing his footing. The weakened ice groaned, split, and gave way. For a heartbeat, his eyes met Ethan's, filled not with fear, but fury. Then he fell, swallowed by the blue abyss. The sound of his scream was swallowed by the wind. The torches flickered violently. Cracks raced up the walls as the structure began to collapse. Ethan grabbed Nora's arm. "Move!" Ranger limped beside them as the ice ceiling caved in behind. The roar of falling stone and flame filled the air. They burst out of the cave just as it imploded, sending a column of snow and fire shooting into the sky. They collapsed on the ridge outside, gasping, faces lit by the faint glow of the destruction below. The storm howled around them, washing the world clean in white. Nora shivered, staring at the ruins. "He's gone." Ethan nodded slowly, then looked at Ranger. The dog lay beside him, sides heaving, eyes half closed but alive. Ethan pressed a hand to his fur. "You found me again, didn't you?" Ranger blinked once, tired but proud. Nora looked between them, voice soft. "Whatever Haven was, it ends here. You two proved it." Ethan turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the storm was breaking. The first rays of dawn cut through the clouds, golden against the white expanse. He whispered, "No." He did. Ranger's tail moved faintly, a single thump against the snow. 3 figures, man, woman, and dog, sat there in silence, framed by fire and ice, their breath mixing with the wind. The past was buried. The storm had washed it away. All that remained was what they carried forward: loyalty, redemption, and the fragile peace that sometimes follows war. 2 days after the storm, the mountains fell silent again. The wreck of the plane had disappeared beneath a new layer of snow, erasing all traces of the chaos that had unfolded there. But in a small operations bunker on the edge of the Alaskan range, one signal was still alive, a lone transmission pulsing through static, carrying the truth Ethan had risked everything to recover. He sat at a steel desk, face drawn and pale, a makeshift sling around his shoulder. The glow from the old military laptop painted his features in cold light. Ranger rested beside his chair, one paw bandaged, breathing slow but steady. The dog's eyes followed every move Ethan made, as if understanding that something important, something final, was happening. Nora sat across from him, silent. She looked smaller now, stripped of the arrogance she once carried, her hair damp from melting snow, her wrists wrapped in medical tape. There was no handcuff yet, but they both knew it was coming. "Are you sure this is enough?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't look up. "It's everything that survived the crash and the cave. The encryption key, the project logs, test footage, it's all here." He tapped the keyboard one last time. The signal bar turned green. A faint tone filled the room as the data uploaded through the emergency satellite channel. A red header blinked across the screen. "Transmission sent. Federal Data Center. Classified release override." Nora's breath caught. "That's it? It's over?" Ethan leaned back, exhausted. "It's out there now. Every journalist, every oversight committee, every vet who ever lost a dog to this program, they'll know. Haven's finished." For a long moment, only the hum of the generator and the soft rhythm of Ranger's breathing filled the bunker. Then, Nora said, almost to herself, "My father used to say science was never the enemy. People were. I wanted to believe that." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. He's not wrong, but sometimes people hide behind science to do things they'd never admit were human. She flinched, then nodded. When they question me, I'll tell them everything. Every name, every experiment, every soldier they used as data. You know what that means? Ethan said. I do, she whispered. And I owe it to Ranger, to you. The door opened then, and 2 officers stepped in, faces tight with protocol. One of them saluted Ethan, the other turned to Nora. Dr. Hale, you'll need to come with us. Nora stood. She hesitated for a second, then looked down at Ranger. The dog tilted his head, ears perked. You don't even know what you saved, she said softly. They'll call you a hero, but you'll never understand how close they came to remaking the world. Ethan rose slowly, meeting her eyes. Maybe that's the point. Some things shouldn't be understood. The officers led her out. Her footsteps faded down the corridor until the only sound left was the low hum of machines. Ethan sank back into the chair, rubbing his face with his good hand. His whole body felt hollow, like the adrenaline that had kept him alive had drained away, leaving only the weight of what had been lost and what had been spared. Ranger nudged his leg gently, a quiet question in his eyes. Ethan smiled faintly. Yeah, I know. Time to go home. He shut the laptop, grabbed his coat, and walked outside. The air hit him like a blade, sharp and clean. The horizon was opening again, grey skies breaking into a pale light that hinted at the coming thaw. The snow under his boots crackled as he moved, Ranger padding faithfully at his side. A transport convoy waited at the ridge. Colonel Hayes, his old commanding officer, stood beside it, watching him approach. Cross, Hayes said, his voice low. You understand what you just did? You broadcast classified data straight through every defense channel we have. Ethan met his stare. Then maybe your channels needed a reminder of what they're protecting. Hayes studied him for a moment, then sighed. They'll offer you a medal, maybe even a promotion. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. Tell them to keep it. Hayes nodded once, as if he'd expected that. And the dog? Ethan glanced down. Ranger looked up at him, tail giving a faint, slow wag. He's not government property anymore. He's family. The colonel's gaze softened. Then get him out of here before the suits change their minds. Ethan climbed into the truck, Ranger settling beside him on the passenger seat. The engine rumbled to life. Through the cracked windshield, the first light of day touched the snowfields, turning them gold. As they drove down the mountain road, Ethan rolled down the window, letting the wind rush in. He looked at Ranger, who was watching the horizon as if guarding something only he could see. You know, Ethan said quietly. They tried to build loyalty in a lab, but they never understood it, did they? Ranger turned to him, eyes bright, calm, eternal. No, Ethan said, voice breaking into a tired smile. Because it was never built. It was earned. The radio hissed once, catching a fragment of a transmission, news channels already talking about leaked files, congressional hearings, and the word haven flooding the airwaves. The world would finally know. Ethan turned off the radio. The sound of the wind filled the silence. Ranger rested his head on Ethan's lap, closing his eyes. They drove until the road straightened and the snow gave way to forest. Behind them, the mountains stood silent, their secrets buried once more beneath the ice. Justice had come, not from a courtroom or a medal, but from a man, a dog, and the truth they refused to let die. A year had passed since the mountains swallowed the last echo of Project Haven. The scars of that winter remained etched in the land and in those who survived it. But time had a way of softening even the sharpest edges. Ethan Cross stood on the porch of a restored barn that overlooked the valley below. The place had once been a forgotten logging camp at the edge of Wyoming's high country. Now a wooden sign hung over the gate, Haven Ridge Rescue. Beneath it, a dozen dogs ran across the fenced field, some limping, some blind, all alive in ways they hadn't been when they arrived. Ranger led them, of course. His gait was slower these days, his right flank marked by a long scar that never fully grew hair again. But when he barked, the younger dogs followed. His presence carried the same gravity it had on the battlefield, steady, alert, unbreakable. Ethan leaned on the railing, watching Ranger herd two excitable shepherd mixes back toward the training circle. "You're still running the show, huh?" he said softly. A voice behind him replied, "He always will." Ethan turned. Nora Hale stood there, wearing worn jeans and a canvas jacket with the center's logo stitched on the chest. Her hair was pulled back, her expression calm in a way it hadn't been in years. "You're late," Ethan said. "Traffic." She smiled faintly, holding up 2 paper cups of coffee. "And a stop for the good kind of donuts." He accepted one, the warmth soaking into his fingers. "You know we have a budget, right?" "Some things are worth breaking the rules for," she said, taking a sip. They watched the dogs in silence for a while. Down by the kennels, 2 veterans were sitting on the grass with a golden retriever. One of the men's hands trembled, the other resting gently on the dog's back. The tremor eased, slowly, until it stopped altogether. Nora saw it too. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, but I guess that's what healing looks like. Quiet, messy, and real." A cold breeze swept through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and thawing snow. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing faintly. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he could breathe without waiting for the next explosion, the next betrayal. The door of the barn creaked open. A young Marine, barely in his 20s, stepped out holding a leash. "Mr. Cross, this one's ready for his pairing session." The dog was a stocky Belgian Malinois, its eyes uncertain, its body tense. Ethan knelt, letting it sniff his hand. "Name's Toby, right?" The dog's tail gave a hesitant wag. Ethan glanced at Ranger, who stood watching nearby. "Go on, partner. Show him the ropes." Ranger trotted over, posture relaxed, tail high. He circled Toby once, then nudged him toward the open field. Within moments, the younger dog was chasing after him, the stiffness fading from his movements. Ethan smiled. "See that? Teaching already." Nora's gaze softened. "He's good at it. Maybe better than either of us." "Maybe," Ethan said, watching the 2 shapes running through the grass. "But he's earned that peace. We all have." The sun dipped lower, painting the snowcaps in gold. Around the field, veterans worked with their dogs, laughter mixing with the wind. One woman tossed a tennis ball and shouted, "Go, Ranger!" forgetting for a moment that her own dog had a different name. The shepherd stopped mid-run, barked once toward her, as if answering anyway, then kept going. Ethan chuckled. He still thinks everyone's talking to him. "They kind of are," Nora said quietly. "He's the reason any of us are here." For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of life, the kind of silence that meant everything was working, even if nobody said it out loud. Eventually, Nora turned to him. "You could have taken the medal, you know. They offered again last week." Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "I didn't fight for recognition. I fought to stop something that should never have existed." He looked down at Ranger. "And to make sure the ones who survived had somewhere to go." Ranger returned, tongue lolling, coat dusted with dirt. He dropped a stick at Ethan's boots and barked once. Ethan grinned. "All right, I get it. You're still the boss." He threw the stick. Ranger took off, powerful despite the limp. The other dogs followed, a tide of motion against the open sky. Nora watched them go, her voice soft but sure. "You think they remember? The ones we lost?" Ethan stared into the distance. "I think they do, just not the way we do. They carry it as instinct, not pain." The wind shifted again, carrying the smell of rain. Somewhere behind the hills, Thunder rumbled faintly. Ethan looked up at the clouds and smiled. Guess the mountain's still watching. Ranger came bounding back, muddy and happy, dropping the stick once more at his feet. Ethan crouched and rubbed his neck. The dog leaned into his hand, eyes bright, steady, full of the same fire that had once cut through blizzards and gunfire. "Welcome home," Ethan said. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Haven Ridge hummed with life. Dogs barking, laughter echoing, the sound of healing in motion. For the first time in a long while, the ghosts of war had no power here. They had been replaced by something simpler, something that didn't need to be explained. Trust, loyalty, and the quiet kind of love that saves people without ever asking for thanks. Ranger lifted his head to the wind, ears twitching, as if listening for an echo from a distant past. Then he turned back toward Ethan, tail wagging, ready for whatever came next. The sun dipped low behind the Wyoming peaks, turning the snowcaps gold and the valley below to a sea of amber light. The air carried that late winter chill, the kind that bit gently at the skin but smelled of pine and distant rain. At the edge of the property, the old barn of Haven Ridge stood sturdy against the wind. A porch light glowed warm across the boards, and beside it Ranger lay stretched out, his paws crossed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The scars along his flank caught the fading light like faint silver threads. Ethan sat a few steps away, coffee mug in hand, a blanket around his shoulders. He watched Ranger in silence. Even after everything, the war, the storm, the betrayal, the redemption, the dog's gaze never changed, always steady, always watching. The sound of laughter drifted from the yard. A small group of veterans trained with their therapy dogs in the field, voices echoing under the sunset. One of them, a young soldier named Kyle, waved. "Heading out, sir. See you at morning drills." Ethan raised his mug in reply. "Don't be late. The dogs will judge you more than I will." They laughed, the sound fading into the hum of crickets. Behind him, the door creaked open. A boy of about 10 stepped onto the porch, bundled in a jacket a size too big. His name was Danny, one of the local kids who helped feed the dogs after school. He carried a notebook filled with sketches of Ranger. He stopped a few feet from the shepherd, watching him. "Mr. Cross?" "Yeah?" Ethan asked. "Does he ever stop watching?" The boy's voice was small but curious. Ethan looked from Ranger to the mountains beyond, the same range that had nearly buried him, and the truth forever. The crash site was somewhere up there still, now covered in untouched snow. No one went near it anymore, but Ranger's eyes never strayed from that direction. "Only when the truth is safe," Ethan said quietly. The boy thought about that for a long moment, then nodded. "He's like a guardian." Ethan smiled. "That's exactly what he is." The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rain, and something older, memories, maybe. The porch boards creaked as Ranger stirred, lifting his head. His ears perked at a sound Ethan couldn't hear. "You still feel it, don't you?" Ethan whispered. "The place, the ghosts." Ranger blinked slowly, then settled again, his chin resting on his paws. His breathing was calm, deep, steady. Nora stepped out onto the porch, tucking her hair behind her ear. "He's been like that all afternoon," she said. "Hasn't moved an inch." Ethan nodded. He knows. The storm's coming again. She leaned on the railing beside him. "You think he remembers that day?" Ethan smiled faintly. He never forgot. He just learned to carry it differently. They stood there in silence, watching the light fade. The last sliver of sun disappeared behind the ridge, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed perfectly still. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. Ranger's ears twitched. He pushed himself up, slow but firm, and walked to the edge of the porch. His silhouette framed against the sky, proud and timeless. Ethan set his mug down, hands in his pockets. You know, people say dogs live shorter lives because they've already figured out how to love better than we do. Nora glanced at him. And what about you? He smiled, eyes still on Ranger. I'm still learning. Ranger turned his head then, just slightly, meeting Ethan's eyes. There was something in that look, familiar, ancient, unspoken. The kind of understanding that didn't need words. Down in the field, the other dogs began to howl softly, one after another, until their voices blended into the wind. Ranger didn't join them. He stood silent, watching the mountains that had once taken everything and, in their own way, given it back. The boy, still clutching his sketchbook, whispered, "He's still guarding." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, always will." Night fell gently over Haven Ridge. Lights flickered on in the barn, where a few late workers fed the younger rescues. Nora went back inside to close up the office, and the boy ran home before the rain came. Ethan stayed. He watched the horizon until the stars began to pierce the clouds. Ranger lay back down beside him, his head resting near Ethan's boots. The dog let out a long, contented sigh. "You did good, partner," Ethan said softly. "We both did." He reached down, brushing his hand across Ranger's fur. The dog's tail gave a slow, sleepy thump against the porch. The rain started soon after, tapping softly against the tin roof, blurring the mountains into grey silhouettes. But Ranger's eyes stayed open, glowing faintly in the dim light, watching the distance where the truth once hid beneath the snow. When the wind rose again, carrying the echo of thunder across the valley, it sounded almost like a heartbeat, steady, unwavering, alive. The camera slowly pulled back from the porch. Ethan sat there beside his dog, two silhouettes framed against the storm. The world faded to black, and on the screen, white letters appeared. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Then, softly, a voice over the fading image. "If you believe loyalty still matters, join us at German Shepherd Stories, where every bark has a purpose and every story finds its way home."